When using one form of structure, as most of the larger production studios do, it's the same story beats put into play again and again. That's essentially big business at work. Those beats can be found in books like Save the Cat, which was first written with movies in mind. The best screenwriters will get creative, and those beats will look less familiar. There are many forms of structure available for writers, especially novelists. If you look closely at the most popular story beats, they are designed to keep the plot and the pace moving, which is essential. And most neophyte writers haven't achieved that sense of pacing yet. Story beats on their own have little to do with character creation or the emotional core that connects readers to stories. Structure is based on psychology at its heart. Psychology applied to your characters as they navigate a life-changing problem through the various stages from the onset, responding to fear and panic, accepting the circumstances, then figuring out the best way to deal with it. This is why so many movies are becoming plot-based and character-shy. The story beats have become not just formulaic, but the emotional core lacks greatly, except for those scenes where someone close to the hero dies. I could go on and make an entire video on this subject, but for now, let's keep this in mind as we move along with the topic at hand. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the third major inciting incident within the first quarter of most stories. I'm calling it the launch because it does just that, launching the core storyline or life-changing problem for the hero. Buckle up because the arrow is about to hit the target and the hero's life is going to change forever. I'm Robert Jones, and this is the Story Detective. We've already covered the first two inciting incidents in the previous episodes of this series. If you haven't watched those, I suggest you check them out, because in this installment, we're going to look at bringing everything we talked about together and see how it can be used to optimize the launch. What the third inciting incident, or the launch, does is bring about an unforeseen conflict. It's often the point of no return for the hero, although, as we'll learn here, that point of no return can already be in play prior to the launch. The launch, like most key points in structure, is a psychological shift, accompanied by a symbolic event in which the hero commits to dealing with that core story problem. Notice I didn't say they grasp the issue fully or understand exactly what to do yet, but this occurs at the moment when they commit. Life becomes very intimidating. This could be a blessing or an opportunity in disguise. Now the hero has no choice but to act and deal with the inconvenience of this insidious problem. Because in some way or other, it's all connected to what happened in that first inciting incident, and deep down the hero knows they probably should have seen the disaster coming, or did something to bring about change before this happened. And now what? Guilt, anger, fear are still knocking their ego around. It's party time for those inner demons. Now it's time to commit, damn it, because this problem isn't going away. Actually, it's gotten much worse. This is life. It's also what fiction and structure emulate. Note that I did not mention story beats, which are very often circumstantial. I repeat, because it bears repeating, structure is combining those circumstances with emotional and psychological nuances. Let's continue with our three examples, the stories that we had in the first couple of episodes, and see how these writers brought their characters to the moment of launch. Star Wars: A New Hope. This movie is tricky for some people. George Lucas used Joseph Campbell's The Monomyth as his structural guide. One of the reasons it's held up so well over the years, when many movies from that same era have not. Considering the first Star Wars was released in 1977, this is quite a feat. As I said, there are many forms of structure. Structure holds together while story beats have changed over time in various storytelling mediums. For example, during the 70s and 80s, it was a popular notion that the entire setup needed to happen within the first 10 pages of a movie manuscript. After that, you were getting into mid-plot, or Act 2. Some of those older movies were ingenious in coming up with scenes that establish characters quickly, but you also have to remember, most movies from that era ran about 90 minutes, give or take. Star Wars A New Hope ran 2 hours and 1 minute, so you would naturally think it's easily divided into tidy quarters when examining structure, and you would be wrong in that assumption. If you look at Joseph Campbell's 17 stages for the monomyth, the entire first Star Wars trilogy and Luke Skywalker's journey fits on that wheel perfectly. The work for these things can easily be found online. If you take the shortened 12 beats for the hero's journey, Star Wars can look a little lopsided on that wheel. Only by dividing it into 3 stages, or acts, can you see how the story fits into separate categories, although it still looks a little off-center compared to most popular film and novel structural graphs today. For our purposes here, we're going to look at the criteria for launching the core story. Since we last saw Luke, he set off to find R2-D2, who ran off to find Obi-Wan Kenobi in order to deliver the message recorded by Princess Leia. Luke is attacked by Sand People en route and is rescued by Obi-Wan. Luke is then told how his father was a Jedi and given his lightsaber. Once Obi-Wan discovers Leia's message, he asks Luke to join him on his adventure. Several things happen here that's worth noting. Luke refuses. He can't get involved. He's needed back on the farm. He's still in resistance mode, in other words. He hasn't committed to the core story problem yet, meaning the core story hasn't launched yet for Luke psychologically. Remember, structure is a combination of events which cause psychological shifts for the hero. The next thing that happens is Obi-Wan says, "That's your uncle talking." But Luke still resists and heads back towards his land speeder, where they find the Jawas who sold the droids to Uncle Owen have all been killed. Remember, Vader sent stormtroopers to find the droids and reacquire the plans for the Death Star. Luke is suddenly worried about his aunt and uncle, because if the stormtroopers trace the droids this far, he races home to find the farm is smoldering and his aunt and uncle have been burnt to death. Luke has nothing left at this point. The arrow has hit its mark. Psychologically, he can either move forward or die. His status quo has been shattered. He decides to join Obi-Wan and avenge his family. What's achieved in this moment, from a criteria standpoint, is that Luke has pursued his new opportunity, albeit in pursuit of his lost droid. An unexpected conflict arises during his pursuit. From the conflict, he arrives at the point of no return. The arrow has struck home. Luke has gone from being resistant to proactive. This is the moment the core story commences, because he chooses to address the problem by elevating his pursuit to the next level in hopes of finding resolution. The Hunger Games. Since the train ride to the capital, Katniss has begun to question Peeta's motives. This continues as they meet new people, talk about costumes and campaign strategies. Katniss and Peeta are announced as a team, right up to the point where they are riding in the chariot, wearing their flaming capes. Katniss is still very much in resistance/fear mode. This is shown clearly when they're holding hands and she's gripping Peeta's hand so tightly she thinks she must be cutting off his circulation. Realizing this, she loosens her grip, but Peeta holds tight, telling her not to let go or he might fall out of the chariot. It certainly appears like he's trying to play up his own fears to match hers, placing them both in a similar mindset, but he overdoes it by complimenting her beauty and maybe becoming just a touch condescending in attitude. It's at that moment where he's being overly sweet and shy that something is triggered within Katniss. She reminds herself not to be stupid, taken in because she feels he's likely planning to kill her. The more likable he is, the more deadly he becomes because he's attempting to make her easy prey. She turns to him and kisses him on his bruised cheek, thinking two can play at this game. At that moment, there is a psychological shift. Katniss is now in the game. She's gone from being resistant to becoming proactive. This decision has launched her role in the core story. It's worth noting here that conflict, which arose from her new opportunity, was not physical, at least not at this point in the story. It's done through cunning, paranoia, and potentially being used by a friend who may be planning to kill her once the games begin. Sometimes the inciting incident that creates a significant shift can be very subtle. And because the shift to becoming proactive is psychological, the action is usually symbolic. In this case, a decision to play the game as Katniss steps up to the plate with a kiss. Yes, I realize this is in direct contrast to what Jessica Brody says in Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And she's entitled to her opinion, which is that the games begin the moment Katniss enters the Capitol, because at that point, she can't change her mind. I disagree with this for two reasons. It's too soon, not even at the 20% mark, and Katniss is still digesting, too resistant emotionally. Remember on the train how she recognized the desperation in her own voice as she watched her volunteer on TV? Collins clearly notes her fear and resistance at that moment, and right up to the moment she's riding the chariot with Peeta. She is not yet proactive. She also doesn't reach the point of no return on entering the Capitol. Neither was it boarding the train. The moment happened when she volunteered. So it was long in play already, which is interesting because she reached the point of no return during the call. Psychology doesn't always fit into tidy packages, and neither do all stories. As long as the package arrives by the end of the first quarter, certain aspects of structure can be totally interchangeable. We were just waiting for Katniss to commit psychologically for all the criteria to be on board and the launch to occur. Sorry, Jessica. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. This is another tricky one. In fact, Harry is very willing to become proactive from the moment Chapter 5 opens, and they haven't even reached Diagon Alley yet. However, he's not quite engaged in the core story either. This chapter has a lot going on, from visiting Gringotts to acquiring everything Harry needs for school. It all seems very proactive, doesn't it? But is any of this Harry's doing? He's certainly willing, but Hagrid, in the role of mentor, is really the one taking the lead, educating Harry as well as filling his list. While it's a very active chapter as the story begins revving toward the imaginative world of wizardry, it's all prep work, isn't it? But by the time Harry arrives at Hogwarts, we're already into Act 2. So that's clearly not the moment of launch. There's also Harry arriving at King's Cross Station, looking for platform 9 3/4. Then the chapter quickly moves along to the train ride, and he's interacting with Ron and Hermione, and he meets Draco. All that seems like we've already broken into Act 2 as well. The train has left the station, figuratively speaking. For my money, this leaves only one obvious choice here, which is the end of Chapter 5, when Harry is handed the tickets to Hogwarts. Again, it's a subtle moment, but in accepting the ticket, Harry is symbolically accepting his fate. This happens right at the 25% mark in the story. Absolutely the latest it can happen for the launch. But it's the final moment of putting everything he needs to move forward on the table psychologically. Has it brought about an unforeseen conflict? No, but Harry is certainly pursuing his newfound opportunity, so the criteria holds. It's also interesting to note that psychology and life doesn't always happen through a negative action. For Harry, exiting his status quo was an event he welcomed. There can very well be positives involved in the launch, and even false positives. Heroes can sometimes be misled into thinking they're getting everything they've always wanted, only to discover there's a price tag attached. The important thing is you recognize the criteria, in spite of how the circumstances unfold in launching your core story in no uncertain terms, and that your hero is proactive by this time and accepting of the fact they are going to pursue the core story problem / opportunity. Here's your checklist for launching your own core story. Hero is pursuing new opportunity, which has arisen after the call. This can bring about conflict, acceptance, or both, through which the hero becomes proactive. This is often considered the point of no return, though we've seen that moment can already be in play. The decision to elevate pursuit to the next level is a psychological shift, but there is an accompanying action which is both symbolic and physical. I hope seeing how these three similar yet different stories have made use of key plot points to give you food for thought and help get your NaNoWriMo project off to a good start. If you like this series, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up and subscribe. It helps the channel and lets me know what types of videos to make in the future. If you want to support the channel in another way, there's a link to my Ko-fi in the description box. And as always, if you have questions, leave them below and we'll talk. So until we meet again to examine the depths of craft within these word-slinging wavelengths of cyberspace, keep those keyboards clacking.